Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the SPOR API webinar. The session is being recorded, and we will make the recording available via the EMA YouTube channel. Please note that you have the details for the technical support in the chat message. So if you experience any technical difficulties with sound, slides, please exit and rejoin the session. In case the issue does persist, please contact us via virtual meetings at ema.europa.eu. For questions and throughout the session, we kindly request you to use Slido. The details for Slido are also in the chat box. Slido.com. There is a code 124062 and a passcode, and we will be trying to address the questions throughout the session as much as possible. Once the presentation is concluded, we will also be able to discuss a few of those questions out orally to address the most voted questions during the session. So on that note, I now hand over to my colleague, Adrian, who's going to be leading you through the SPOR API presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, as I was saying without you hearing, my name is Adrian Costano. I'm the SPOR Platform Manager, and today I will try to go with you through the a presentation about the access to the SPOR API, some key components and key information about how to use it. And of course, I will have a short demonstration. And of course, at the end, questions if we can basically answer at the end. So without further delay, these are the four main parts of the presentation. So we'll start with the access to the SPOR API. This was presented also in our November webinar last year. However, we have received many questions and requests about access to the SPOR API since, which means that the information is still needed for you to understand how to use it and how to proceed in order to get the necessary access to the SPOR API. We'll present some information about what help and support is available, and then we'll go to the more technical part, talking about the resources, components, and a demo, and quite a lot of tips this time, and also about what to do and what shouldn't do when using the SPOR API. A lot of information about the SPOR API are available on the SPOR portal at spor.emea.europa.eu. And this is where you find the web UI version of the SPOR system. And also there are the documents under the view. So basically, if you go to document view, you will see a lot of documents, both business-wise and technical, which I do really recommend reading. Of course, if you are non-technical, the business one are the more important, but for all the developers and the technical people that implement the API, the technical documentation is critical. I do want to draw your attention to these four business documents because they do contain a lot of information, and especially if you can look at the API General Terms of Service, which explains what we consider the usage of API, what is a fair usage, what are the terms, and how it should be used. And it's a lot of information in there, which is really recommended to be read. And of course, it's the API access request form, which you will need to use in order to request access to the SPOR API, and more information about that on the next slide. In order to gain access to the SPOR and SPOR API, you will need to use the EMA account management system, and this will provide the functionality for you to manage your accounts, your password, and request the access to the various EMA systems, including SPOR. And there are two different environments for the EMA account management portal, one for production and one for the UAT. The links are on this presentation, which, by the way, we will make it available on the same SPOR Web UI portal. once the presentation is finished. Any issue you have or questions, you should be using the EMA service desk in order to raise a ticket, and then we will try to answer that as soon as possible. We were, and I hope you see now how to request access to the SPOR API. This is the diagram which presents the process from the moment when you self-register or using it to the point where access is granted. So you need to use the EMA account management portal to register in production and also to register in the UAT environment. You will need to complete a SPOR API access request form, providing the details. It's an Excel form that you will need to complete. Then you will need to raise a service request to get that access. Attach your form access request form to that, and you will need to compile a list of test cases on your own systems, which will need to be added to the ticket, and so we can see and assess the usage of SPOR API by you. And then we will go now to the details of each of these steps. The first two steps is about self-registering in the EMA account management portal. In production, there are some recommendations here about what you should be using when you register, what kind of name you should use. So something that is close to your organization, and then add API at the end as the first and second name. So that means the username is instructed by the system from those values, and it makes it much easier to identify. You need to use a unique email address for the API, and definitely you shouldn't use somebody else's personal email address because they might want to use it to self-register, and emails are unique in the EMA registration portal. You need to be affiliated, of course, to the right organization. And if that doesn't exist, you will need to submit a change request for the creation of the organization via the OMS SPOR portal. And once you are registered, you will need to request an industry user role or ACA user role. But the organization must have first registered a super user. For the UAT, there is a slightly easier way to register because it's a test environment. We are interested only to see the ability to test the API. And for instance, if your organization does not exist, you can choose any available organization as long as it allows you to submit the API code. And you will not need to have a super user assigned to your organization before you can submit the request for you to be an industry role. In UAT, as part of the registration process, we will require also for you to provide your public IP address, because we need to allow you to connect to our internal UAT system. And we do that on the EMA firewall to allow you to be able to go to this test system. In UAT, you are required to perform certain test cases depending on the usage of the SPOR API, either OMS or RMS or both. And if you are using a third-party software to connect to the SPOR API, you do not need to compile the evidence of the test cases. However, we need to see the relation between you and third-party provider, and also the third party needs to give you the evidence of the test cases from the moment when they applied first time for the access to the SPOR API. The next step is for you to complete this SPOR API access request form. There are one tab which refers to the access request itself, which has to be completed for the first time when you submit the request to access the SPOR API. And then the tabs RMS test cases and OMS test cases can be completed during the request, and but they are mandatory for you to get access to that to the SPOR API. You have to raise an EMA services request and attach the SPOR API access request form completely. And then it's you need to compile the test evidence, and once it's finished, attach this form to the original ticket, and then we will take it forward and process it. As I said earlier, you don't need to carry out the test cases yourself if they were previously carried out by a software provider, but we need to see the evidence of the test execution from the third-party provider and of your relationship with this third-party provider. The next step is once the API access request form has been submitted, including the test cases, we will assess it, and if there are further questions, we can discuss through the ticket raise. And eventually, once everything is clear, you will get access to the SPOR API. And after that, you can freely use it. The roles that you can have in the SPOR API are in the SPOR portal are either industry or NCA. With several type industry super user, industry user, and the same similar NCA super user and NCA user. Any question you might have, you need to raise it with the EMA services portal, where we can help either technical or our colleagues from the business, the SPOR data steward. Now, we're going to move towards the more technical part, but I will start by explaining a bit about the documentation that is available to you from a technical side on the SPOR portal, on the web UI, as we call it. The first and most important, I would call the SPOR API specification document. It's a comprehensive document. It's 98 pages and includes a lot of information about the principles and the list of all the available endpoints for both RMS and OMS. And I mean here, this is the SPOR API V1, so it has to be completely differentiated from the SMS and TMS, which you might have already questions about, but that is a completely separate specification, which will be published at a later date. We are talking today about the SPOR RMS and OMS, or as we call it, SPOR API version 1. This document should be used as the first point of contact for any developer. There are further documents which, together with the SPOR API specification, provide a comprehensive list of information necessary for you to implement the API in your organization. The SPOR API XSD schema describes the data format and of various payloads that they must conform to, both as an input or as an output of the endpoint calls that you might make. And that is, together with the SPOR API specification, the two most important documents for any developer. There are further documents such as the integration patterns, which describe the API specification on how to combine multiple calls to achieve specific scenarios, which are described in this document. There are another document about the sample payload, which helps you to understand how the payload should be constructed. And finally, it's of course the SPOR Web UI, which is the portal that allows anybody to use SPOR. Either you are registered, or not. If you are not registered, you can still browse it as an unaffiliated, as a guest, but you will not be able to do some operations. And of course, once you are registered, all the operations are available to you in the SPOR API. But of course, it's a manual. You have to do clicks, so it's not anything automatic, which is what the API allows you to do. Connect your internal systems with SPOR directly. In terms of resources and concepts, for the authentication and authorization in SPOR, we have only the basic authentication over HTTPS as the only supported mode currently. We might have in the future other options, but at the moment, this is the only available. For the versioning, as I mentioned, the SPOR API V1 refers to the RMS and OMS, and the V2, which has completely different specification and payloads, is the one that is going to be used for SMS and TMS once that is available. These V1 and V2 are not compatible with each other, and we plan to maintain V1 for the foreseeable future. There's no plan actually to withdraw or make obsolete this version. There are in the API specification, there are various information that you might find helpful. For instance, that we can provide the payload either as XML or JSON. Not all the endpoints are JSON, and also some are available to download via zip, so a CSV file zip. All the information is there. We will go through it later in the presentation and discuss a bit in more detail. There are four major methods that are used in the SPOR API: the post, put, get, and delete. Delete is not really available directly. And in terms of the status code that you expect from the SPOR API, the standard industry for success is the one started with 2, failure 4 or 5. And this is something that your developers would be able to understand. In terms of the main concepts in RMS and OMS, I suppose you are familiar by now, or if not, you will be very familiar soon. In RMS, we have the list terms. Terms can be translated. We have change requests, documents, and then you can have further concepts such as suspicion, tag, and search query. OMS has a little bit less concepts, and the main ones in OMS are organization location, change request, and documents, which are usually attached to the change request. We're going to spend a bit of time on this slide, and I created this on purpose for this webinar because it's based on the experience of the past few months since the previous webinar, and we need to clarify quite a bit of the actions that are to be done by the SPOR API. So once you get access to the SPOR API with the same credentials, you can use both OMS, RMS, and an older file, what we call the UTCT type search. UTCT, you might be familiar with that, is the EU Telematics and Control Terms list. And the same credential gives you access to all this. Access to the SMS and TMS API, so the V2 version of the API, is completely separate. It will follow a different procedure with a different username. And as I said, it's not compatible with the V1. Now, in terms of retrieval of the organization and locations, I have some recommendations for you because I've seen it a lot in the past few months, and I will also explain later in the presentation what happens when you use that. You have the options to, for instance, if you want to download all of them, there is no need to use individual codes to each organization location. If you notice here in the first line, I used a keyword called page size. This page size equals 0. That means it downloads the latest version of the organizations as a file. So that is using the overnightly generated files. So in terms of a load on the system, it's a lot less because it's not generating ad hoc at the time of your call. Of course, you might want also the versions equal true, which is available, and the same applies to the locations. You can download the whole locations list in one single go using this code. We've seen it lately, in the past few months, a lot of these calls made to individual organizations. If you imagine, we have, I think, almost 40,000 organizations to place 40,000 calls to get the details of the organization versus placing one call and get all the list of the organization. So the load is much less impacting the systems. And the exports are also available via the SPOR Web UI. There is a button once you log in, and when you go to the first location to export the locations with or without history, with or without the versions. Another recommendation is about using the delta retrieval rather than use, for instance, every single time organizations with versions is equal true, which means you download every time all the versions, although the vast majority never change because once it's created, it's there. So it's a lot of redundant data by doing this once a day, or we've seen it several times a day, calls being placed from the same user using the same call with versions true, and that is simply placing unnecessary load on the system. We do recommend using the keyword lock modified after, for instance, for the locations, because that would allow you to get only the information for the organization which are modified, let's say, from either the previous time that you run the query or from the day before if you plan to run this API calls on a daily basis. The same applies to the RMS. They have RMS API also has a similar modified after keyword, which returns only the terms modified after the specified date and time, irrespective of the list, or the same endpoint, which you see here, which is called search terms, would allow you specifying the list where you wanted the terms to be checked against the date and time. We'll do some exercises and some demonstrations during later about how this works. Regarding the timing of the query, we've seen also a lot of calls being placed during the business hours. We've seen tens of thousands of API calls played in a very short stretch of time, like in 1 hour, 25,000 calls at, let's say, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which when the system is used heavily, and that plays unnecessary load. It's much better if you plan to run any heavy call to run it in the night between 3 a.m. and 8 a.m. when it's outside business hours. We have no jobs running, and it's the lowest load in a 24-hour period on the system. A few further advice I've seen also happening again in the past few months. There are cases where the querying of the API from an organization has an algorithm which keeps repeating the call literally going forward. So there is really no defined time limit. There is no number of tries. It keeps querying if there is a failure. And when there is an issue, just by doing this, you place further issues on the system. So just keep that in mind. You should define a number of a limited number of tries. Let's say if it fails 3 times, wait for a certain amount of time before trying again. Don't keep trying it because that will affect. And also, it's recommended generally to use the daily versions equal true for organization and location because that you can use it once in the beginning. Nobody stops you. You can use it. You download all the information that you want. You load it locally, and then you can download only the data that it has been changed in that moment or the moment when you run previously the query. We've seen it run it several times a day for individual organization, and even several times per minute for the same organization with version equal true. We have organizations which have 300-400 locations, each with 10, 15, 20 versions. So such a call unnecessary placed load on the system because obviously things don't change within a minute for a location to change this version. So please keep in mind how you create the code for the API in the future. If you have any questions, raise a request. More than happy to help. We can go through with you and explain in more detail. Try to understand what are your requirements, and that can be used forward to define a proper usage of the API. I will go through a bit to this demo in terms of I'll have some wording and some information to share with you, and then we will go and I'll share with you some calls and how they are constructed, how it should be used, and what are the differences between various endpoints. So I plan to show you again how to get this a full list of organizations and locations, how to search for them, and how to get the various details that you want. Please keep in mind, for instance, that a maximum number of organizational locations that can be returned in a page for OMS is 200. Default is 20. And all this is controlled by the keyword page size. And for instance, if you want to your call to return, let's say, I don't know, 500 organizations, it's much more constructive to build the call in a way that the page size is bigger. So you can call page size equal to 100, and then you get 200 organizations in a page, rather than keep it for page size 20 or even 5 and generate many multiple pages. In terms of the load to the system, it's better to get it with a bigger page size if your query returns many organizations, and of course, if you can process the those number in a page like, let's say, 200. This is the example that can be used to download all organizations in one single call. So page size equals 0, used at the end of the endpoint organization, allows you to download the overnight files, which is generated basically. SPOR generates a file with all the organization and locations overnight, and using page size 0 allows you to access that. There is very little load on the system because it's not generated ad hoc. It's simply uses a file that has been already created and is available. However, this page size equals 0, you can't use it with conjunction with any other query parameters apart from versions equal to or the default, which is versions false. Version false always returns the last version. One thing to keep in mind is that if you notice any location ID or organization ID start with the keyword ORQ instead of the loc/or org, please don't use it or consider it for the future, because this is a temporary identifier, which means that the location organization is still in a provisional. Once it becomes active, it will have, of course, the loc or org as a prefix. In terms of getting the organization, there are in OMS API 2 endpoints. They work slightly different, and I answer many questions about this in the over the time that I work with the SPOR API. You have an endpoint which is separated, for instance, organization / and then the organization ID. This returns one single organization detail, and it's irrespective if it's active or inactive. It will return that specific organization detail with its status. Now, there is a different one which has the question mark after the organization, and that is designed to search for organization. So here you can provide multiple parameters, which allows you to search for the organization. But this by default returns only the active organization. So if you want to ensure that you get a reply even if the organization is inactive, you need to specify that. And I put here the example of the call. You need to use the keyword or that status, and then specify if it's active tilde, which signifies or inactive. Make sure that you use uppercase active and uppercase inactive and not lowercase, because otherwise it will not be recognized as a status. And finally, before we go to the examples, we plan to slightly change the way that the API works in terms of the fuzziness of the replies, because if, for instance, you search for an organization that doesn't exist, and my example is org-1, which obviously is a non-existing organization, because all the organizations have 9 digits after the org dash. This would return the closest result to the string in itself, org-1. The system has an internal scoring to try and match that. However, after talking with some of you, we understood that it might provide actually a different result than the one searched either by mistake searching for a non-existing organization. And it's better when the organization doesn't exist, the record that doesn't exist to be highlighted, if that's the case. So we plan over the next couple of weeks to deploy that in production. For instance, if the organization doesn't exist, you simply get an HTTP 404 error, no record found in MDM. And that means you will not get an organization that is different basically from the one that you search for when the one that you search for doesn't exist. And with that, I will try to share the examples that I prepared for the OMS API. RNS. This is the OMS. So as I said in the presentation earlier, the first and the most simple to use the organization, to see an organization is to use this, the get an organization only one at a time. By the way, I hope you see the screen, and if there is any issue, just raise your hand if you can't see the screen. Maybe I can ask my colleagues to confirm that they can see it. Okay, thank you. So the once you use this endpoint / organization, and then you specify the existing organization ID, this would allow you to get the details of the organization along with the all the locations that the organization has. This is a test organization that we have in our UAT system. It's a fairly simple constructed XML with all the information that you need along with the location. You notice here at the end of it that we have a version timestamp. and that tells me that the last version of this organization is 21st of April 2021. So if that's the case, obviously it doesn't make sense to keep running organization with versions 2 because organization hasn't been changed for let's say almost a year. So you need to be careful when you construct the API call and pay attention to the various keywords that would allow you to understand when that happened. For instance, the last version of the organization. If you use, for instance, the versions equal true, which I simply added at the end of the previous API call, you notice that there are 16 versions. So each one of that will be identified by the time that it was modified on. The last one is in April, and then it goes in the decreasing order in February, and the previous one was the same date, and then in 2020, and so on and so forth. But the difference between this call, which gives you the last version, and this one is that it contains 16 different versions, which never change because once they are in the past, they are in the past. It's simply that this call is a lot heavier than the previous one. In itself, it's not extremely heavy, but you multiply that by the number by 40,000 organizations, and then you can imagine that you get to very big numbers in terms of the load on the system. So as I said, once you know that it was modified in the past and you already have all the information, there is no need really to run a good version to proof. The other endpoint that I mentioned, if you don't plan to get the information only about one specific organization, is to do searches. And that is allowed by this endpoint. You see here, you notice that it has a question mark after the organization, and then there are a lot of keywords and parameters that can be used in order to identify the exact organization that you are after. In this case, I wanted to check for all the organizations which name contains the word test. Wildcard work both at the end or at both ends of the name. In this case, it tells me that there are 254 organizations, and these are separated by default where the page size equals 20, because this is the default page size in OMS. And of course, it will be much easier, for instance, to run this with a page size equal to 100, because you get 3 pages rather than 12 or more pages. So the load is slightly less in the system. For instance, this is exactly what I've done here. I run it with the page size 50. I get less pages. So you simply add the parameter at the end of the previous one using the ampersand, the end keyword, and that would allow you to add and combine all the search parameters. And this is the example that also I used earlier, and I mentioned to you the org status, because this specific endpoint to search for organizations brings back only by default the active one. So if you want that to bring back the organizations that are active and inactive, you just need to specify. You will notice here that in the previous call, I have a total of 254 when I search for the organization which contains the word test in UAT. If I specify that I want all of them active and inactive, you notice that I have now 255, which means that I have basically one organization that is inactive. And in order to prove that, we can simply take away the word active, keep the status inactive, run it, and then you notice that I have my organization which is inactive containing the word test. It's very simple how the API can be constructed in terms of the parameters. Now, in terms of location, because if you remember, we have organizations and locations are basically some of the main concepts in OMS. The simplest way you can search for a location is by knowing the exact location ID. So that would allow you to identify the location, to see the organization that it belongs to, the status, and of course the address of the location. And there are other parameters here, like when it was created and when it was modified. This one, for instance, was almost 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. Locations also has an endpoint which allow you to search for all locations that belong to a specific organization with a name. And I use the same example as before, the ones that contain your name test. And that brings me a total of 330 locations, which belong to, if you remember, the 254 organizations that contain the word test. So and you can put here any name you want, and depending on your requirement. And the same applies. By default, it brings, as in case of the organizations, only the active one. And if you want to see also the locations which are inactive, you need to specify that in the call. You see here that I put location status is inactive and active and inactive. It gives me 336. And if I use the standard call without specifying, I had 330, which means 6 of them are inactive. So be careful when you use this search endpoint for location or organization to specify what exactly you need. So you get the results as expected. Of course, you can go and further enhance the search of locations. For instance, I can search for all the active and inactive locations, which they belong to an organization ID, which here you can actually use wild characters. So I want all the organization which start with this particular root 1000068. I want to see all those locations. So you can mix and match the parameters in any way you want. You can specify how you want to sort by. In this case, I wanted to sort it by my organization name. And you see, as soon as I started and specified that I want only the organization starting with this particular 7 digits at the beginning, my total items dropped to 116 from the previous search, which was 336. All this information is in the SPOR API specification document. All the parameters that are need to be used, and it just simply need to go through that. Another example that I wanted to show is this with a versions equal true. You can also add that in the parameters search for the location. It still gives you the same number of location 116, but in this case, it will give you including the versions of the location. And finally, what I mentioned earlier is about using the keyword lock modified after, which simply tells you to check only locations or organizations modified after a specific date and time. And that significantly reduces the number of return data, rather than all the time getting all the information from the SPOR API and containing a lot of redundant information that you already have anyway. So in this case, if I search only the exactly the same call as before, which contain 116. Now I said, okay, I want to bring me only the ones that are modified after the 1st of January 2021. That would allow us to bring it down from 116 to only 24. This is just an example, and this is again a test system. But that shows you how what is the difference. And over the for instance, 24-hour period and many hundreds of users and many tens of thousands of API calls, this can have an overall impact on the system, how quickly it can return the data. We do work at the moment on an enhancement to the system to upscale it in terms of the power to retrieve, provide you a lot more quicker the information. So you have a more seamless experience. But we need to be mindful of how we make the calls, because at the end of the day, everybody wants to have access to the system. Everybody wants to use it. So if we all use it in the right way, we can all benefit from it. That was my quick demo about the API. I will go back now to the RMS. So again, about RMS, obviously, the main concepts in RMS are lists and terms. And these are where most of the codes are going to be placed for the SPOR API. And I have a list of a few tips, some explanations about how to search, and then again we'll go through some examples of the how to construct the API code. In case of RMS, the number of terms that can be returned on a page, it's 1,000. So it's a lot more than the 200 that it was for OMS. And this is to simply admit that we have a lot more terms in RMS than organizations and locations in OMS. The default is the same 20 for the page size. If you don't specify the parameters, but as I said, you can retrieve up to 1,000 terms in a single page. The same applies to the RMS as to the OMS. If you don't need to use the versions equal true, then don't use it. Use the delta search with the keyword modified after, and that will reduce the load. And as an example, you can load first time all the informations, and then use the delta, and you can build a local caching if you want, and so on. So now, if you want to get the list, there are two endpoints, fairly similar to how it was for the organization. You have one that returns the specific list when you have the list ID. And then you have the one where you have the question mark after which you can put a lot of parameters. This is a search list endpoint. And you can combine multiple parameters. You can have what searches. You can specify the status and so on. You'll see more when we get to the point where I'll show you the example. Also, there are two endpoints to get the term summary, working slightly different one from each other. One, for instance, is the term-summaries. This returns the summarized terms for a specific list, specified by the keyword list ID that you see in this. And then you have a different one, which is the search terms. The search terms allows a combination of parameters across all lists, or you can specify a specific list ID, but you can specify across all lists and return summarized terms, maximum 1,000 of those. Of course, there are, in case of RMS, there are in fact further two endpoints relating to the terms. One is the list/terms. This returns the detailed terms of a specific list, either XML or a specific CSV. And if you want to get the detailed terms of a specific list in one go, you can use this and you can download all the terms in one go. And this is coming again from some export done overnight, which means it's a very little load on the system. and you don't need to query every individual terms to get the details of the terms in a list. The difference can be massive because you have lists which are hundreds or thousands of terms. So using the slash terms with an export in zip to get everything in one go with a very little load on the system. And then yes, it's the other option to get the individual term ID, and that returns the detailed term specified by the term ID. Now I will share my browser to go through the examples of the RMS. This is the RMS. As I mentioned earlier, the first and the most simple of that is to get the list by the list ID. And here I use a very simple list, which is the age range in RMS. And by using the list ID, you get exactly the information that you can see on the screen. But this will always return one single list. You can't do any search here. If you want to do searches, before that, if you want to get actually the terms of the list, which is what I mentioned earlier, this list has 20 terms. You use the flash terms, and that would bring you the detailed, the 20 terms of the list in a detailed form. You can do it. I'm in a browser here. I can't show it because I don't have the option. If you use any tool to get data, you can specify if you want it as zip, and that would allow you to get all that information in a zip file. And then the other option of the endpoint is to go further, and after terms, you can specify the exact terms, and that gives you the information. But if you compare, for instance, here, this information that you see for a term with what information you see here for the specific term, you get the same information. So imagine that you have a list with, let's say, 200 of these or 2,000. You can either use this call with maybe a page size 200 straight away, and you get all your information in one go, versus running individual calls of the 200, so placing 200 or 2,000 individual calls to get the same information. So everything it depends on the exact requirement you might have. And again, if you are not sure or you have any questions about to use it, please raise a request by the help desk, EMA service desk, and then we'll more than happy help you and guide you through how to create your API call. The other endpoint that I mentioned earlier was about the search terms. You notice that I'm using the question mark. This allows me to search for terms using it's a long list of parameters that can be used as specified in the SPOR API document. In this case, I wanted to search for all the terms that contain the name term, and I specify the list, which is the age range, and the status equal current. This allows you basically to, it tells me that there are one single term called term newborn infant. Now, you can also use, for instance, the wild characters at the beginning of the name, and that gives me, in this case, two terms, the preterm newborn and the term newborn. So you can play with this to your liking and to your to the needs that you have, and get the information from that. In this case, for instance, as you notice, I specify here the list ID, and that's why I'm getting two terms. But you can, for instance, not specify the list ID and that searches across the entire list of in RMS. You notice that from one term, I get now 349 terms across all lists containing the name term within the term name. Okay. Now, you can specify the status of the term. And this is the, you see here, for instance, 349 in total. But if you don't specify, it returns you 355, which means that basically I have 6 terms that are not current. So depending what you want to get, please make sure that you use the correct status, and please make sure that you use it uppercase because it makes it different from the lowercase. Lowercase would be simply ignored, have to be uppercase. If I want to get, it's another example. For instance, in this case, I wanted to get everything that contains the term, and that suddenly it goes from 350 to over 1,000. So again, depends what you want. This can get a very big numbers here in terms of terms if you use the wall characters at the beginning and the end. And also this can be some of the heaviest faults of RMS API if you use the wall characters, both beginning and the end, because it is going through all the terms in all the lists. I think we are getting now close to 200,000 terms. So it might be a slower if you use the more wild characters. Again, if you have to do, you have to do. There's absolutely no problem. But for instance, if I don't specify here, I search for all the 1,058 terms that contain that particular name. The default page size is 20 because that's how it is in RMS, which means I would get about 52 different pages to get my information. And the alternative is, of course, to specify, to change that. And let's say put page size 100, and now I'm getting just 11 pages. So in terms of load, it's less on the system because you can provide more terms on one page. So that would be about the RMS. It's again, it's a lot of information and a lot of parameters, which I didn't go through all of them because it would probably need a day to explain that. But I think it gives you a flavor and an idea how they can be used, how they can be combined. And any question you have, just ask, please raise the ticket. I will move back into the presentation now. And we were with the RMS. Now, a few further details about the API. Again, we had some questions in the past few months about the SSL certificate, especially in the testing environments. In the testing environments, these are signed by an internal EMA certificate authority, which might change in the future, but at the moment, you can simply ignore if the client-side security warning is provided. So you can get on with with your testing in UAT. In production, the SSL certificates are issued by industry recognized authorities, so there is no issue with that. The concept of unaffiliated user, it's maybe not clear, so I just want to specify what is the main purpose of having an unaffiliated user. Is to be able to create one single chain request to get the organization created, so you complete the registration process. That means that once you are an affiliated user, you can submit one single chain request in OMS to get the registration process. Once that it's approved, the registration of the organization, then you can have a more proper role, let's say industry or NCA. One area that you might have noticed is the fact that when you use pagination, we have a search token. And that search token is generated at the time when the search is made. It's valid for 24 hours. So you can't use a search token from a month ago that you use. So it has to be generated properly. That allows you to simply take the information from the search token with the data. And in fact, I should actually share my screen and go back to where I used a search token. For instance, here, I hope you see. So for instance, in this case, I search all the lists, all the terms that contain start with term. You notice here that it gives me in the header, next page, and then it tells me that the search token is presented here. So if I want to use this and move to the second page of my query, I don't need to specify any of the parameters. I simply need to use this as this particular query, and that would contain in itself all the parameters. So this, if I copy and I paste it in a browser, or I use it in any other tool that you use to get the information, would allow you to get the information from the next page of the original query until all the queries are basically all the pages are unused. We go back now to the presentation. Right. That would be it. One point is that the incorrect query parameters are ignored by the system. So if you use, I don't know, 2 question mark, one after the other, or 2 slash one after the other, or 3 just by mistake, these are simply ignored by the system, and it will try to impose the API call and using the information provided, but ignore anything that it's wrong. We might be looking at address that in a more structured way, but for the moment, this is how it works. API and the merge process, and that was also included in the November webinar, but I think it's important to also include it now for the people that didn't attend that. The main idea of a merge process in OMS is that an organization ID or a location ID published by the OMS will be retained for the lifetime of the system, will always point to a single data record. So when an organization A and organization B are merged in OMS, only one of the organizations survives as what we call golden record, and it is the one with the lowest organization ID. All the others become linked to the golden record. So they will not be inactivated and they will not be deleted. So as I said earlier, if the organization A and organization B are merged in OMS, and let's say the organization A is the one with the lowest org ID, and that automatically becomes the golden record, it means that when you search for the organization B, this will still work, but it will point to the organization A, and you will see in the payload that you receive that it contains both org ID, but one actually points to the other. And this was done with the idea to ensure stability of possible references from external systems, and we could not simply remove the older ones because we had to return an error. And this applies to the location. Oh, this is the example that I used last time. For instance, I have 2 organizations that I merged, the one 9491 and 9492. And 9491 becomes the golden one. So if I search for organization ID 9491, I see that it contains the 9491 and 9492. When I search for 9492, it returns the first, the golden record, which is 9491. But you see here in the identifier area of the XML that it tells me that there are both of them. So I know that looking at this, that in fact 9491 has been merged at some point into 9491. The next two slides contain some pseudocode to allow you to implement of a workaround if you really you need to get the correct information into your organization. So basically, if you get a gap of an organization modified after a certain date and time to synchronize with the MS, then for each organization, you can perform an API request, and the organization ID is equal to the main organization, then this is the surviving one. If it's not, then this is a non-survivor which has merged at some point in the organization ID that exists in the response. So this is how we deal with the merges, and the same applies to the location. As I said, it's absolutely the same concept. We do not delete location IDs for the lifetime of the system. And that would be the end of my presentation. And I thank you for the time, and I hope there were some questions. I will try to see if we can answer any. I think we have still time allocated to answer questions.
Hi, Adrian. Indeed, we do have time to answer some questions. But before I hand over back to you for technical questions that the colleagues are flagging in the meantime, let me cover one question that kept coming up. So a few of you asked, first of all, what is an API? So API does not stand for active product ingredient. It stands for application programming interface. So this was supposed to be a technical webinar for colleagues who are already familiar or becoming familiar with the SPOR application programming interface. And then the next question is, why do I need to care about this, and why should I should I use it, in what conditions should I use it? So through this application programming interface, you are able to get access to most up-to-date organization and referential data. So the next question is, why do you need that data? A few of the systems that EMA is developing, EAF, the new DADI forms, web-based forms, CTIS, UDRA GMDP, are already using data from SPOR, so referential data and organization data. If you are using the user interfaces, so the PDF form or just going to CTIS and using the portal and so on, you don't necessarily need to use the SPOR API. But if you are planning to do machine-to-machine integration, i.e. submit data directly from your company to centrally EMA, then you might want to ask your IT department to start looking into the SPOR API and start understanding how it works so that you keep your data locally synchronized and you can then support that machine-to-machine integration. So that is the reason. This is a technical webinar. We are trying to support those that are already on the journey to use the referential and organization data locally in their systems, because they're planning to support this machine-to-machine submission of data directly from your RIM solutions to EMA systems. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Adrian, maybe.
No, not really.
So on that note, I think we can hand over to the hardcore technical questions. Colleagues, how do we run this? Will somebody read the most interesting questions to Adrian to cover? I believe we've addressed all of them in the chat. Feel free to add more. You still have time.
I don't know how many have been addressed.
Hi, Adrian. This is Angel here.
Yes.
We have a question which is very interesting because I think you can explain again how to synchronize the latest modified changes, also using the page size 0 and everything, all the goods and perks that you explained from the API. So the question says, do organizations data on the web UI and organizations data coming from the API are in sync? We are facing issues for the past couple of months that sometimes the org data that is present at the UI can be able to pull it through API. We use the API call with page size 0 in organizations. So could you reply to this one?
Yes, the web UI actually is based on the API. So when you see the information in web UI should match the one that is in API. However, please bear in mind that in API, in the web UI, for instance, when you search for an organization, let's say that was merged, you will get the only one, the one that survives. Whereas in the API, it will provide you both IDs. So there is a slight difference in the behavior, but web UI does use API in fact to get the data. It's more or less an extension of the API to be designed in a more user-friendly way. Anything that you have and you think that you might look different, or you need an explanation for some of the codes that you get and you are not sure why you get them, raise the ticket. It will get eventually to us, and then we can explain and we can take it with the example and understand what happened. And this presentation anyway will be shared. It will be published on the SPOR Web UI, and it will be made available to you. You can download it from the Web UI and go to that at your own pace. I see here some questions, but yeah, I don't know if there were. No, these are already answered. So yeah.
So probably I can share the latest that they probably haven't been answered yet. Can you confirm you can see my screen?
I can see the screen. Yes.
You can see the questions there?
Yes, I can see them.
Yeah.
I think the first one is not necessarily an API related, more of a business one. Regarding requesting access for an organization that operates in more than one country. Anything specific that one could be aware of? Not that I'm aware of. I mean, you can have multiple locations, but one organization. So the access is granted at the organization level. And once you grant access, you can access it. There is nothing else for you really once the access is granted.
Yes, so the access works per organization to access the SPOR portal and to submit any changes either to OMS or RMS. You only need one role. As long as you have one role, then you have access to perform any changes. If you'd like to have more roles assigned to other organizations, you can also request this, but one is enough for you to be able to submit any changes.
I'm not sure I understand this one. Does it need an API key? What it refers to? There is no key as such. Once you're registered and you gain the SPOR API role in EMA management portal, then you can access the API and you can make all the queries that you might want. Unless he refers to something that I don't understand. How the UATs are organized, not sure. I mean, you have an Excel file that you receive along with the document that three tabs. One is your request form, and then you have two tabs, one RMS, one OMS, for you to go through the test cases and fill them in and provide it back to us so we can review. How you organize the test, it's up to you. Once you gain access to the SPOR API in UAT, you can do it at your own pace within your own time. And when you are ready, simply attach the Excel file back onto the ticket, and then we will review it. Okay, regarding the synchronization issues of SPOR and EPD, will they be solved soon? I'm not sure what you refer to in terms of synchronization issues. If you have any particular issues in mind, just provide more details, please.
Any specific issues, yes, please contact our colleagues through service desk so that we can better address, because it may be an issue from the SPOR, there may be an issue from the UPD. We need further assessment to be able to address it.
Yes. This SPOR API is for OMS and RMS, is not for product. As I said, what we've been through is RMS, OMS, SPOR API version 1. SMS and PMS API are completely separate. As far as I know, they are not yet widely available. They are in the later stages of testing, and once they are available, there will be a completely different registration process, and the format will be completely different. It will be FHIR compliant. So it will require a separate webinar to go to that. The question about DADI and EAF, I don't think it's a technical one. Not sure if I can answer that. Search only retrieves a maximum of 200 results. So when I try to make a search per country, it's not possible. How can I search per country? It's a search in OMS or RMS. I need more information because, as I said, the search is not limited in terms of the result. The search is limited in terms of number of results per page, but it should retrieve everything. So it depends how you actually construct the search. And again, give us more information. We can look at the exact details of what you do, and I can provide an answer. Raise a ticket, and it will come to us, and we'll look at that. Okay, that's an interesting one. Is there a limit for how many API calls you can make per minute out to the SPOR API? No, there isn't, and that was, in fact, some of the problems that we faced over the past few months, because there were too many calls made per minute or per hour, and we are looking to actually limit that in the coming months, so everybody has access to the system, and one user cannot take the entire bandwidth and affect the others. What is the timing of providing new data by the API? Well, depends what kind of API call you make. If you have, for instance, the one that searches the ad hoc one, it's instant. Whatever information is in the system, you get it by the API. If you use, for instance, the options with page size equals 0, which downloads the data of organization locations, that is from the overnight. So anything in that file will not contain the current date. So it depends what kind of call you make.
I think this one you already addressed, right?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
This one. Once I'm registered, how my application can identify the SPOR as me? You are provided with a username, a password, and you are affiliated to a specific organization. So SPOR will identify who are you because it talks to the internal EMA management system. So this is how it recognizes. You simply log in with a username and password for the API, and the system will know who you are. You don't need any other key. So modified after modify that includes the existing ones, not the new ones or the new organization. It's the one that are modified, existing and being modified for that. I think some of this has been answered. Currently, SPOR website is quite slow with the query to API be at the same speed. It should be faster to the API, but depends what you mean by slow. As I said, website uses API, so all the searches that you make or information that is displayed is in fact provided by the API. By using API, you cut a bit the middleman, which is the SPOR Web UI. So it should be slightly faster, yes. Can I use one general email address for both environments? Yes, you can, because the environments are different. So the email address has to be unique on the environment. So you can use same email address in both UAT and production. Shall we register first in a test environment and later in production? That it makes sense, but you can register at the same time. You will not be granted access to production without going to the test environment. So it's important that you provide all the tests for us to review first, and then once that we review that, we can grant access to production. Should the email address a personal one or a functional mail address? That is up to you. It has to be unique. As far as we know, it has to be a unique email address. The system will not directly contact you if you make any call via the API. However, keep in mind that, for instance, if you submit a CR, then once the change request is approved, the system will generate an alert telling you that the CR is approved. So if nobody monitors that mail, I never get the alerts.
If I can jump in here with that functional mail address, if you are registering account with your name via EMA registration portal, that we require basically nominal email address, which would be name, surname, and the domain. This is because of the security reasons. So we would definitely be in favor to basically create account with your personal email address.
Can we submit a list of IDs to query more than one list? Yes, you can. You can query all lists, or you can specify lists by individual ID. Yes, we use the standard wildcard character. I don't know the regulatory permission question. When it comes, let me try to read this. It's quite a long question. I don't know what is the company RIM system, first of all. I don't think I understand exactly this. We might want to keep it, or if you want to have more details to this, we can look at into raise the ticket. I'm not sure I understand it.
The way I see it, this one is this REAM system is see it more as a regulatory system that companies have on their end. So they have their information on products, pharmacovigilance. They can have its internal systems used by pharma companies, and basically they ask, will sync include viewing the concrete information behind each value?
The API provides
exactly,
in the XML the name and the address of the location. So
yeah,
it's up to you if you want to use that into your local system and load it.
And what values exactly do you want to link, and do you want to extract? API provides you all the information, the fields that you want to establish, that you want to synchronize, and that you want to see, that you want to read from OMS. That of course is up to you and how you connect them with your RIM system.
I think the question about the translation of terms, it's a business question. So I wonder if our colleague with RMS can provide an answer to that.
Hi, Adrian. This is Jaume from RMS. I'm indeed replying in written to that question.
Okay.
You can do it orally now.
Or I can do it orally, exactly. So basically, translations are provided through the SPOR portal. There's a dedicated translation functionality on the RMS web portal that is foreseen only for users from national competent authorities. So we are not expecting any translations from industry users. And the user needs to have the NCA translator role, which needs to be requested and assigned via the IAM service. And I think that's it. So then through the API, if there are any translations available, then those can be queried through the API. So I hope this addresses the question.
And I think these are all the questions we have there.
So the question on the PMS API, I've also replied orally to a similar question, saying that the API is already in place, but we are still developing the proper access and security to it. We hope to complete it no earlier than Q4, so the estimated date is around the DADI go live indeed. And access would primarily be given via the DADI interface, and that's read access. We are still discussing if and when and what conditions will we allow direct write access into PMS. So that's still under discussion. There's no concrete deadlines for that. So for the data enrichment, we're also foreseeing that there will be a dedicated user interface for that, and indeed no machine-to-machine integration in the first go. Last question on the URLs for RMS. Who's taking that one?
Yes, I can take that. This is Andre Idu. So the answer is yes. The URLs or RMS lists are actually used as systems in the codings used in the PMS APIs. I replied in written form as well. Codings are an approach in the FHIR standard, which PMS uses to define controlled terms. And codings use a system and a value. In the case of using RMS terms, the system is the API URL to the RMS list by ID, and then the value of that coding would be the RMS term from within the list that is used. So in the example I shared there, there's the system of the domain list, and then we could specify the human term as the value. And if I can take the other question, so the basic authentication adds 10 seconds to API requests. The web version uses a JWT token, eliminating the 10-second penalty. Will we be able to use the JWT token in the SPOR API? So we are looking to modernize the authentication authorization mechanisms on the SPOR API version 1 as well. And this is on our roadmap. However, it hasn't been planned yet for any upcoming quarter. We do want to start working on it this year. So I think in the midterm future, there will be an implementation using JWT token, which should be better performance than what we have today. And today you should use your own credentials for accessing the SPOR API. You are not allowed to use the JWT token.
And we've addressed all of the questions that we had in our dashboard. Last opportunity. So if we don't see, I don't see any further questions, then I thank you for your participation. I hope it addressed the questions you had, and thank you. Have a good afternoon and a good weekend.